who does that sort of thing, right? We take it to a mechanic shop. And in this mechanic shop, this is their job, to communicate with the car, to understand what's going on, to work it, and to get it back into working order. Something that is broken, and get it back into working order. And they're in this set place where they work a shop, and they even have set uniforms, right? They all wear their overalls, their onesies, and they look good out there, and they fix the cars, and they make it right. And so I use them to mediate between me and the engine if something goes wrong. When something breaks, this is who I go to fix that problem. And this is the idea of what we see within a priest. Like I said, this is actually ingrained in how we do everything in our society. I don't understand how to do my taxes, how to make the right dish. I go to a restaurant, right? We mediate all things in our lives because it's kind of set out that way. In some ways, I think it's sad. I always looked at my grandpa as somebody who could build and do anything. And then he talks about his father-in-law, my great-grandpa, who could literally build and do anything. There's stories of him being a homesteader and going to Idaho and never built a well before and built a well a mile deep, just because that's what you do. But we don't do that anymore, right? We kind of outsource all of our issues. So this should be almost too ingrained into us that we don't even realize how aware we are of needing somebody to step in between us, but it happens all the time. So with that, let's look at more of a biblical understanding of what it is to be a priest. So we actually have this in Hebrews 5, and we're going to look at Hebrews. If you want to know more about Jesus as priest, read Hebrews. The whole book is focused on understanding Jesus as priest and what that meant to him. But if we can get that Hebrews 5 passage pulled up. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sin, is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins, as well as for the sins of all of the people. And no one takes this honor on himself, but he receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. All right, so this is very much kind of just the biblical breakdown of what it is to be priests. So first of all, they're selected and appointed. All right, so within the Jewish culture, this was mean, and they reference Aaron. All the priesthood comes from Aaron. And Aaron was born of Levi, so they are the Levites. If you're a Levite, then you could be a priest within the Jewish culture. So that was fundamentally understood, that you didn't choose this, you were selected, you were appointed. And even, so if you're reading in Exodus about where we see frankincense, right before that, they give you the list of ingredients for the anointing oil of the priest. And what I find interesting is a gift wasn't given to Jesus that was in the anointing oil for the priest. I think that wasn't a Levite. He didn't come from that tribe. And that's going to be very important to us. But as we look more at what that priest does in 5, he relates to matters of God. So he is to be this intermediary for the people. He offers sacrifices for them, and then it also talks about this being a servant, this working with people with grace and a gentleness to them. This is the role of that person. And so there's this onset of who they're supposed to be and what that looks like. So they offer sacrifices not only for the people, but for themselves, because they themselves are sinners, right? They themselves fall short. So in order to put themselves in a proper place to be able to offer a sacrifice for the people, they would have to first sacrifice for themselves to make themselves clean enough to go and mediate for God and the people. Not only that, but they would always do this. This is always in the setting of a sacred place, right? So they would sacrifice so they could enter the sacred place where God was and then offer the sacrifices and actually sprinkle blood for the people. This is part of what a priest would do. He would sprinkle the blood. Those of you who know the story of Jesus, some of this is clicking. You're like, oh, okay, this is making sense. He also wore special clothing, right? It was told, God told directly to Moses what this would look like, and it was white and it had some jewels on it. These jewels were pulled directly from jewels that were mentioned in the Garden of Eden, and then they would also wear a crown, it's called an ephod, and have a template plate, essentially saying, "I am God's." Right? So there's an outfit, there's a place, and there's a job, and this is what we're looking for priests to be. Now, I mentioned that they all should be from the tribe of Levi. And and they're all Levites. And that's interesting because we have a selected group of people that God chose. But what's really interesting about this is this all starts with Moses. So Moses has this encounter with the burning bush. And in that encounter, God tells him, do all these things. And actually, to be honest, I love this. Moses is a total coward in this whole situation. He gives like 90 excuses, anything he can think of. And among them is, well, I'm not very good at speaking. I'm not I'm not good with my words. You know this. I'm not good. So he says, fine, I'll give you somebody to speak for you. I'll give somebody to speak for me to you. So this is the first setup of a priest. And they continue to call him Levi. Well, so is Moses, but he's pulling out, no, this is going to be different. So he sets aside this lineage. Here's the issue, though. So God sets aside Aaron and his whole tribe, the Levites, to be the priest. From the very get-go, they screw up. Like the very first time that God talks to him and sets up Aaron, he says, okay, take the elders and go talk to Pharaoh. And what does Moses do? Him and Aaron leave the elders and go talk to himself. Pharaoh gets more mad. And like this continues over and over and over and over. Literally, Aaron does almost nothing right, I swear to you. The guy just screws it up. And this is who God's elected to be priests. And this actually continues to play out throughout the Old Testament. We see the priest doing all sorts of mischief, using the role improperly. Like there's women that are set to mind the courts, and we see priests and their sons having sex with these women. Like literally, as bad as you can get, all sorts of debauchery, they literally almost never get it right. And that is this lineage of priests that we have that have been anointed and selected, and they never get it right. But we actually also see priests before we see that from Aaron. Before that's elected, before that's selected. And I never thought about this until I was really like honing in on this idea. And we actually, the first idea and image we have of priests is actually Adam and Eve in the garden. If we think about what this person is, they have a set task, they're in a set place, right? And they're there to mediate. Adam and Eve were created, and they were given the image of God. What it is to image God is to the things around them. The Old Testament understanding, that culture would understand it like, yeah, we know of images, like this king puts an image of himself there, right? So God created living images to say, you show to all creation, I am the ruler, and I do it through you, right? So Adam and Eve were the first like mediators between God and all of creation. And they were called not only do that to creation, but to each other. And they're in a set place, this Garden of Eden, right? And they screw it up and they fall. What's fascinating about this idea of them as our first priest is as Moses is giving this, as we're setting up the tabernacle, as we're setting up where God would be, everything is built around what Eden was. It's guarded by cherubim. They have the same jewels. They wear the white because they're supposed to be glowing. Like everything is built on this idea of the garden narrative. Because from the very fall, God's goal has been to bring us back into proper relationship with Him and set creation right where it was supposed to be. So we see what it was supposed to look like and all of God's creation, and man was always made to image God, to be priests to His creation and to each other. This was the initial idea. This is the fall, and this is what we're working to get back to. And then we see this kind of odd story that fits right in Genesis 14, but it's referenced in that Hebrews 5 passage. So if we can pull up, we can continue on in Hebrews 5. This is verses 5. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he has heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. and was designated by God to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. All right, so we have this introduction to Melchizedek in this Hebrews 5 passage saying that we know that all the priests come only through Aaron. So you must be a Levite, but we know that Jesus was not a Levite. We see multiple different times in two Gospels, we see the genealogy of who Jesus was tracked all the way through. He was a Lion of Judah. That's who he is. He was from a different tribe, so he wasn't supposed to be a priest. But it says here that he was a priest in the order of Melchizedek. So Melchizedek is this strange story that we find in Genesis 14, and we don't get a lot of backstory, we don't get a lot of context, we don't get a lot of understanding, and honestly, there's not a lot of expounding after. Like, it's just kind of in there, and it's like, why was that there, and what did that mean, and where did he come from? And then you're supposed to just tuck it away. So just to give you a little bit backstory on Melchizedek, so Abraham in Genesis 12 is called. And God says, I'm going to call you out. I'm going to make a blessing through you. All the nations will be blessed. And I will bless those who bless you. That was one of the things God said to Abraham. I will bless those who bless you. So a little bit after that, Abraham goes out, and then somebody comes and says, hey, somebody has taken captive Lot, your cousin. And he's like, all right, I'm going to handle this, because there's these kings that are fighting. So he gathers up like 300 and something guys, and they go, they fight, they win, they get Lot back, they come back, and on their way back, they're stopped. And two kings come out. And one king is just kind of a normal king, has a normal interaction. And we're supposed to parallel this with what happens with Melchizedek. Because what happens with Melchizedek is he sees him and he throws Abraham a feast. And then Abraham is so overwhelmed by this, he gives him 1/10 of everything that Abraham has. So we see this first offering. This is before any of the laws were made, before any clarification was made that you should give 1/10. This story happens. We actually see in Hebrews, because Hebrews is all about Jesus as priest, we see a greater unfolding of this story. So we're going to look real quick at Hebrews 7, starting in 1. Let's see. So this Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also, king of Salem means king of peace. All right, so this guy comes, his name means king of righteousness, and he's the king of Salem, which means king of peace. So Melchizedek is the king of righteousness and the king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. So we actually get more explanation into who Melchizedek is in Hebrews than we do in Genesis 14. We get a fuller idea of the story. So Melchizedek is this priest before we've had any other priest laid out. We don't see who anoints him. We don't see who calls him. We don't see any of his backstory. But his name means king of righteousness, and he is the king of peace. Solomon is where Jerusalem would become. That's where he was king, was in Jerusalem. And he was the king of peace and the king of righteousness. And this is who Jesus follows after. It also has some interesting ideas here. It says, without father or mother, without genealogy. Now, this doesn't mean that he didn't have any parents, that all of a sudden he just was, and he began, although some people do wonder if that is truly what it's saying there, but is that he wasn't appointed a priest and a king because of where he came from, but because of how he acted out his life, because of the things that he did, the way he operated, because he did a job in a particular place in a particular way. He was a priest. He was a mediator of God. He was a king and a priest. And we're going to continue to see that. He was righteous. And then it talks about him being priest forever. This means he continued out being a priest through the end of his days. And this is the priest that Jesus comes in the name of Melchizedek, this priest that just kind of shows up, pops in, gets 10%, and goes away. And he supersedes any priest from Aaron. He's before that. He's the next priest we see really out after Adam and Eve. And we get that story, and then they just kind of move on like it never through David. About King David. So David, kind of a similar story, is anointed as king, and then it takes him all this time to actually come into being a king. He has to run from Saul and almost gets killed, and craziness happens, and it's a wild story. But we see Jerusalem. He is over everything, and he defeats the Philistines. So he's raising up, and he gets the kingdom to a place where zeal for God. He loves God. And so he says, we must bring the ark of God here. This is the place that they've constructed that God physically embodies and lives. This is the representation of where he lives. So he's like, we got to get this thing back here. And at first they have a little trouble. Gideon actually kills one of his friends that's helping him because they're kind of irreverent and not paying attention, and they're just kind of off. So he kills one. It's kind of wild. And then they decide, no, we got to do this. We got to do this. So they come back and they create a system. So King David and kind of his crew are carrying the ark, and so on the 7th step, anytime we see 7, it's after every 6 steps, on the 7th step, they stop and they sacrifice an ox. And they do this all the way there. So David is now acting out as king and priest. He is doing sacrifices to people. And as they